everyone and welcome to this week's Sam Says for FF Scout. I'm Sam from the FPL Family and we're going to be talking about all things Game Week 17. Thinking about those players that score big in terms of their fantasy points, goals, assists, clean sheets, bonus points. But also looking at the players who might still be great for the Christmas period, because even if they didn't score points in Game Week 17, the underlying stats look good, the chances that they created, the goals and the expected goals that they should have scored were looking positive. So let's have a look first of all at some of the big games, and then we'll look at some of the individual players from some of the other games. Okay, so let's start this week with looking at potentially one of the bigger games from the FPL point of view. Manchester City and Arsenal. Arsenal 0, Manchester City 3. Big result for City in that title chase. Even bigger potentially in terms of us as FPL managers. KDB and Sterling, the two most sold midfielders of this game week, getting goals this week. Sterling with a goal, looked okay in the game, didn't think he set the world on fire, but did return fantasy points for those managers that have kept him. Kevin De Bruyne, on the other hand, absolutely on fire in that game. Really unlucky not to have got a hat-trick within about 37 minutes. He was on absolute fire. Now, with a 19-point haul, he seriously punished the managers that sold him. And it now leaves us as FPL managers with a dilemma as to what we do if we've already got rid of De Bruyne. Do we bring him back in, knowing that City still aren't necessarily the attacking team that we would want them to be to spend that much money on a player? Or do we risk going through the Christmas period without him? De Bruyne, it does have to be said, looks like the heartbeat of that Manchester City team. He seems to be the one that's going to fire them through the games, and he's going to be the one that, if he shows up, is going to get the attacking returns. Interestingly, Jesus, he's done well actually for his managers who brought him in while Aguero's been injured. He's got 22 points in the last 4 game weeks, which actually is a good return given that he has had a blank in that period. But Aguero was pictured back in training today, so where does that leave you if you are a Jesus owner? Potentially leaves you back with a rotation risk. I would expect to see Aguero coming back into the team as soon as he is available to Pep, and then it's a bit of a risk, isn't it? At times Pep has said he wants to play the two of them together. We might see some rotation. I wouldn't expect necessarily for Aguero to come in and play 90 minutes from the get-go. So we might have a couple of weeks grace, well, a couple of game weeks grace, which basically means a week, whilst we see how Pep's going to transition Aguero back into that side. But Aguero will be back soon, and that might mean that we have a problem if we're a Jesus owner. From an Arsenal point of view, it's looking pretty grim from an FPL point of view. Aubameyang with just one attempted header off target and one shot from outside the box the whole game. Not exactly what you're looking for when it comes to picking a very much so premium striker. Lacazette benched again in this game week, doesn't seem to be able to get a place back in that Arsenal team, and so again he's not really on the FPL radar right now. Defensively, Arsenal haven't looked great all season. Now with Kolasinac going off injured, Tierney out for a while, it's not looking like Arsenal are going to be any good defensively anytime soon. It's also all up and down in the air this week in terms of the rumours surrounding the manager position at Arsenal. So until that kind of gets settled, I feel like Arsenal are well and truly on the back burner in terms of picking somebody from the Arsenal team to be in your fancy team. Alright, so in terms of stats from that game, apart from Deeney, Aubameyang had the fewest touches in the final third than any other forward during game week 17. Again, suggesting we shouldn't really be getting on Arsenal. From a Manchester City point of view, from KDB's point of view particularly, no asset has scored more goals than him from outside the area so far, with 3 over the course of the season. Sterling, 14 of his 17 big chances have come away from home, and 8 of his 10 attacking returns have also come in games where he is playing away from home. Now that's really interesting for us as FPL managers, because as standard we look to the home games as kind of the bread and butter for our FPL players. Those are the games where we want them to be performing really well. Actually with Sterling, it seems to be the games that he is playing away from the Etihad that he is better so far this season. So Manchester City away games might not necessarily be a bad shout for Sterling. Alright, moving on. Sheffield United 2, Aston Villa 0. Really interesting result this, with 2 newly promoted sides going up against each other. Fleck with 2 goals for Sheffield United this week would be I think I would be talking about him a lot if it wasn't for the fact that he picked up his 5th yellow card and therefore is suspended for game week 18. So not a fancy option just yet, but the underlying stats for him look fantastic. So from game week 19 onwards, once he's available again and once this risk of suspension disappears, he could be a really, really nice fantasy asset. Particularly when you think that in the last 7 game weeks he's got 4 goals and 1 assist, in comparison to Cantwell, who so far we've all had as our kind of, or a lot of us have had anyway, as our 5th cheap midfield option. In the same time period, Cantwell's got 2 goals but been benched 3 times. So once Fleck is over this suspension, he looks great as a 5th midfielder choice. Okay, other options from Sheffield United at the moment, obviously Lord Lundstrom bringing some attacking returns and finally back into his game. A lot of managers have been getting off Lundstrom in recent weeks, and for me that always felt like a bit of a risk. A player who is quite classified as a defender in the game, yet is playing as a midfield player for his team. Always in or thereabouts in terms of the attacking returns potential that he has. He's been really unlucky in the last few weeks not to get some assists. There was a couple of goal opportunities also that kind of went awry in those games. But this week he got an assist and that is now his 3rd assist and 6th clean sheet of the season. So for the value that he has, or that he offers, he is a great pick still for me. Now he has had another price rise since the end of game week 17, so he's now going to cost you 5.2 million. But if you don't own him, I really do feel like it's time to jump on the Lundstrom bandwagon. It's also potential there to double up with the defence, with Henderson looking good, clean sheet for him this week, and also Baldock, who whilst he didn't get any attacking returns this week as he has done in previous weeks, has got the clean sheet this week. So it's really interesting when you look at those two together. Lundstrom on 42 points across the whole season so far, and Baldock on 40. So they're actually quite close in terms of the attacking returns they're getting, and therefore their total FPL points that they've scored so far. Both of them look like great options, great cheap options in terms of filling your defence over the festive period. On a negative point though, from Sheffield United point of view, Mousset, a lot of people getting on him a few game weeks back, but this is now his 3rd blank in a row. Subbed on 60 minutes this week, which isn't ideal when you're looking for attacking returns from your FPL team. There are so many good options up top at the moment that holding him is becoming a bit of a challenge, especially as in the last 9 Premier League games he's only twice made it past the 67th minute mark before he was substituted, so that might be a problem over the festive period. Alright, the Aston Villa point of view in that game then, Grealish. He was one of the most talked about assets going into game week 17, people talking about him as the go-to Aston Villa asset, and I think even at the back end of that game, having missed a penalty for Aston Villa, he was still absolutely the go-to asset for Aston Villa. He had more shots inside the box than any player for any other, either of the two sides across the whole game. So for me, if you're going to go with an Aston Villa player, it's Grealish. The other options are a bit limited. McGinn's sitting a lot deeper now, so has become less of a fancy asset over the past few weeks. I have Heaton and Henderson, so I have both my keepers playing in this game as rotating keepers. Now, Heaton has looked good, but Villa are still bottom of the league for shots conceded in the box. And so there is always a good chance that they're going to concede goals. Their expected goals conceded is always quite high as a result of the number of shots that they give away in the box. Now that is both a positive and a negative for owning Heaton, because if he saves them, then obviously save points are good, and he is regularly ticking over save points during the fantasy games. But there's an awful lot of clean sheets that are going in games of late. So it's just something to bear in mind that Aston Villa defensively aren't looking very solid. So if you're going to go Aston Villa for the sort of improved run of fixtures that they have coming up, then Grealish seems to be the one to go for. The surprise of the game week has to be Chelsea 0, Bournemouth 1. Didn't see that one coming. Bournemouth now end a 5-loss losing spell. Really interesting that they would win away from home at Chelsea. I think both sides by the end, Chelsea in particular, kind of looked like they were playing out for that 0-0 draw. Now, from an FPL point of view, that's not great for us as Chelsea owners. A lot of people owning 3 or at least 2 of the Chelsea attack. Tammy Abraham, obviously still a popular choice on his return from injury. Pulisic, because of that lovely purple spell that he had between game weeks 10, 11 and 12, is popular, as is Mason Mount as the cheaper of the Chelsea players. Now I think if we start with Pulisic, really interesting that he went on this lovely run of goal scoring during 10 to 12, and we've had nothing since then, which has been really disappointing. And it's kind of that nice run he had lulled a lot of people into false pretenses that he was going to be the kind of golden boy of FPL, and that he was going to come good, and that Frank had done everything right by him in easing him into the Premier League. Now, when you look at the statistics from him when he was playing in Dortmund last year, he has actually never scored more than 4 times in a season for them. Now, having already done that at Chelsea in that purple period that we saw between 10 and 12, are we surprised? Is it going to happen again? Now, I would say it's unlikely that Pulisic isn't going to get any more attacking goals over the course of the season, but he definitely isn't on form right now. Now, that might be just to do with him, but it also could be to do with Chelsea as a whole. They don't seem to be playing their best football at the minute. There looks to be a lot of tired legs out there, none less than Mason Mount, who looks like he needs a rest. Lampard's hinted that there could be some rotation over the next few weeks, so bear that in mind if you hold Chelsea assets, that they're not on the best run of form. They face Spurs next, and there is a risk of rotation. Frank's already spoken about that during his post-match interviews over the last few days. From a Tammy point of view, Abraham was pretty much invisible for most of that game. He did have 5 more touches in the box than any other player during the match, but his expected goals for that game was just 0.39, which, as a relatively expensive and very highly owned striking option in the game, that's not what we want. We want far greater expected goals in a game against a team like Bournemouth, who, unfortunately for Bournemouth, were massively hit by injuries over the course of that game, losing Ake beforehand. He's an integral part of their defence, and so that should have been a defence that Tammy Abraham could have scored goals against. But actually, they did really well. They man-marked him, they played him out of the game. And so from a Bournemouth point of view, a Bournemouth defensively point of view, they can take a lot of heart from keeping that clean sheet, particularly at a time where they didn't have Callum Wilson or Harry Wilson. They didn't have Adam Smith, Steve Cook, or, as I've mentioned, Nathan Ake. So they were really hard hit with injuries in that game. Had Josh King back, which would have buoyed them up before the game, but then he was replaced on 66 minutes holding his hamstring, and unfortunately looks like we might have had a repeat of that hamstring injury. So if you are a Josh King owner and you held him over the course of his injury, doesn't look like he's going to be back anytime soon at the moment. So potentially he's one to be moving on, which is a shame because actually Bournemouth did look good in that game. The fixtures look okay too, so it would be nice to have a Bournemouth attacking option. But with injuries to their key assets, it's really hard to know which one to go for. Harry Wilson looks to be the one that's going to be closest to return, so maybe he's one to watch out for over game weeks 18 and 19. Okay, finally, in terms of the games that I'm going to look at, Wolves 1, Spurs 2. Now, really interesting game. Jimenez was the most transferred out player ahead of game week 17, just ahead of KDB and Sterling. Now, he returned an assist in game week 17, so he has yet again, continued to buck the trend of people getting him out, but he keeps getting attacking returns every single week. He is nicely ticking over the points. So from an FPL point of view, he actually looks like a great fancy asset to own, as does his midfield counterpart in Traore, who scored the goal for Wolves and looked absolutely phenomenal in that game. Spurs team really struggled to deal with Traore, and the only real way that they could deal with him was to foul him. He had a lot of fouls against him in that game. He looks like the real deal in terms of a cheap midfield option that also is going to bring you attacking returns. The sort of cheap midfield option that you actually want to play every week looks really good. And actually, when you look at Traore from an attacking returns point of view, he has got more FPL points than any other midfielder or forward player priced at 6.0 or under. So he is a great option going into that Christmas period. Another positive for the attacking players at Wolves was the number of shots that Jimenez and Jota had between them in that game. They had 9 shots between them over the course of that game, those 90 minutes. That was more than the entire Spurs team did in the game. So from an attacking point of view, Jimenez and Jota doing exactly what we would want them to do from an FPL point of view. They're getting the shots on target, they're getting the shots on goal at least, and if they continue to do that, then the attacking returns will absolutely come for those guys. From a Spurs point of view, Lucas Moura with the goal, the least owned of all of the Spurs attacking options. Obviously Dele, Kane and Son much more highly owned than Lucas Moura is in the game. Lucas Moura has been phenomenal since Jose Mourinho started at the club. He has scored in 3 of the 4 games that he started for Mourinho, and looks to be the real deal under him. Now we're yet to see what will happen when Lamela comes back. We're expecting Lamela to be back in training and potentially available maybe for the Boxing Day game, potentially just for the one afterwards. So that might unsettle a few players at Spurs in terms of who's going to be playing, but right now Lucas Moura looks like a really nice cheap option and a great way into that attacking Spurs team at a time where attack is the best form of defence for Spurs. Of the big 3, Dele, Son and Kane, it was Dele that was the most unlucky not to get his 5th attacking return in a row in that game when Eric Dyer belted it off the woodwork from what would have been his assist. So I think if you are a Dele or a Son owner or a Kane owner, wouldn't be too concerned about the blank in that game. It was more to do with how well Wolves defended against Son and Kane than it was to do with Son and Kane themselves. I still feel like Kane is a little bit too expensive, given that you can have Dele and Lucas Moura and even Son for fairly cheap, fair amount cheaper. Plus they're also going to get you the clean sheets if Spurs manage to keep some clean sheets over the Christmas period. One final stat for that game, Moutinho. He was top in the key passes table. Now a lot of that's down to do with him being on set pieces, but being top of the key passes table can only mean positives in terms of assists and goals coming for him over Christmas. Keep an eye on him as a nice differential way into that Wolves midfield. Okay, a few other players that I've picked out that were brilliant in game week 17, either because they were actually brilliant and got lots of attacking returns for their FPL managers, or because the underlying stats were there and they were really unlucky. So let's start with the guys who did perform really well in that game week. Salah seems to be back to his best with 2 goals during game week 17. No concerns about his ankle anymore. Klopp has come out and publicly said that it's all better and it's back to normal. So I'd expect to see Salah continuing to be back to his best after the Liverpool blank in game week 18. A lot of people potentially moving out their Liverpool assets this week. If you are a Mane owner like me, one of the things I'm seriously thinking about doing is moving Mane out and bringing Salah back after the Liverpool blank. For me, that makes absolute sense. I think Mane had a lovely run where he was definitely the key asset to have at Liverpool in terms of that midfield. He was the one doing all the running, he was the one with all the goals and the assists in his locker, while Salah's ankle was a little bit iffy and he was being protected in terms of the minutes that he was playing. Now, with the ankle seeming to be back to normal, we're starting to see Salah regain those FPL points that he wasn't getting over the beginning part or the latter part of this period in time. I would expect to see Salah accumulating a lot of goals over the Christmas period. Another player that did really well in game week 17 was the Crystal Palace keeper Gaeta. Now Gaeta has been on absolute fire for the last couple of weeks with 2 lovely clean sheets and lots of fancy points for his owners. This week he lost the clean sheet, but he made 9 saves during that game on Monday evening, and in making those 9 saves he earned himself a lot of save points and the 3 bonus points, meaning that he ended up on an 8-point haul even without a clean sheet. So in terms of goalkeeping options, he looks a great bet, particularly as the Crystal Palace fixtures continue to be nice over the next few weeks. Finally, a player that didn't score any FPL points this week, but all of the underlying stats for him in that game potentially point to him still being a really good fancy asset. Danny Ings. He hit the bar, he hit the post, he had a goal ruled out for an earlier foul, which was a very debatable foul at best. So you can consider yourself incredibly unlucky if you are a Danny Ings owner that he didn't have at least 1 goal. He could have easily had a hat-trick. Obviously, had he got that goal, that would have been an additional 4 fantasy points and probably some bonus points too. So if you're a Danny Ings owner coming out of that game, as I am, Really unlucky that he didn't score any points. Definitely not one to kind of get rid of, I think, over Christmas. He is absolutely the talisman at Southampton right now. He is the one that everything is coming through, and if Southampton are going to score goals, it's going to be Danny Ings who gets them. So he could still be, if you don't own him, even after a blank last week, a really nice option for Christmas. Alright guys, that's it from me this week. I'll be back after Game Week 18 with a look at how things went, a look at the scout notes. If you want to read more about any of the games I've talked about or the games that I haven't mentioned, head over to the FF Scout website, have a read of the scout notes. They're available for every single game in Game Week 17 and they will be for all of the games in Game Weeks 18 and beyond. They are a really brilliant read. And at the bottom of those you'll have access, if you are signed up as a member on the FF Scout website, you'll have access to the members area data. If you aren't a member, now's a perfect opportunity to sign up. You can now do it monthly, and at the moment it's just $1.99 for the first month. Thanks guys, see you next time.